Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yes, it's our weekly voyage of discovery in the wonderful world of books. Books I've been reading and interviews I've been having with those authors. And today we are joined by a lovely author coming to us from Washington State. Her name is Katherine Bolger Hyde, and she's here to discuss with us her new book, Hanging with Hugo. Now, this is a mystery book, and it's not based upon, it's part of her Crime with a Classic series. If you remember Sue Grafton, who had A for this, B for that, C for that, well, it's sort of like the same thing here. She skipped a few numbers, or a few letters, she told us, but it's the same idea. She had arsenic with Austen, and now she's up to hanging with Hugo. And so she tells us a little bit about herself, the fact that she has a degree with Russian literature and is now writing traditional mysteries. She distinguishes traditional mysteries from cozy mysteries. That's very interesting. Hadn't really thought about that, but she gave us a lot of thought, and she came to us telling us all the stuff about this town, how she puts it together, how she comes up with the titles and everything else. It's a very fascinating interview with an author. It's a fascinating interview that we don't give away the ending of the book because we don't want you to do that. We want you to get the book, okay? But what we want you to do is learn a little bit about the process and what goes into the writing and everything else. And this is just a really fine interview. I think you're going to really enjoy it. So, without any further ado, let's go right into my interview with Katherine Bolger Hyde. Katherine, welcome to Books and Looks.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, I really enjoyed this book, and I am looking forward to chatting with you about it. One of the things about the book before we get into the book, you give a shout out to something called, I want to make sure I read it right, the Rockaway Literary Wine and Chocolate Society. Who is the Rockaway Literary Wine and Chocolate Society?
Well, it's kind of a long story.
That's
I
okay.
belong to the Oregon. I belong to the Oregon Writers Colony, which owns a house in Rockaway Beach, Oregon, which they rent out to members. And there's a group of us who have been going there every summer for, I think it's 18 years now. And during the pandemic, we started meeting online for a critique group every week. And when we are in Rockaway in person, we drink a fair amount of wine, only after writing hours are over. And we reward ourselves with chocolate. Every time we finish 1,000 words, we get a square of chocolate. So I propose that in the spirit of the Guernsey Literary Potato Peel Pie Society, I propose that we call ourselves the Rockaway Literary Wine and Chocolate Society. So it's a group of five women that are great friends and great writers and responsible for the relative lack of loose ends in my books.
Well, that's good though. It's good to have a group you can talk to and discuss your book and get some critiques and some criticisms and some helping aids, and that's great. And that's great. So I'm glad now we know who that is, and that's very good. Well, Katherine, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? Your education? What degrees did you get? Were you always from out in the state of Washington?
No, no, I was born on the East Coast. I was born in a suburb of New York in New Jersey, and my parents moved back and forth a few times because my father worked in New York and wanted to live in the city, and my mother wanted to raise her children outside the city. And the marriage eventually broke up. But after my parents divorced, we did live in New York City for a while. Then we moved to Maryland, where my grandmother lived. And then my mother remarried and we moved to Kansas for what I always refer to as the worst year of my life. Not anything against Kansas, really, but my mother and my sister and I all got mononucleosis that year. So I was in fourth grade. I pretty much missed fourth grade. But then we moved to New Mexico, where I spent the rest of my growing up years, and I went to college in Portland at Reed College. So that's where I began. That's where my connection to the Northwest began. Uh, After finishing Reed, we moved to Seattle. I got married at that point, and we moved to Seattle for 4 years. And then my husband was accepted to medical school in Nashville. So I lived in Nashville for 10 years. And the marriage broke up during that time. I remarried and moved to California, where I lived for 30 years, over 30 years. and we just my husband retired, I semi-retired, and you can't live in California on a retirement income unless you planned really, really well, which we did not. We sold our house up there and had enough to buy something outright here in Vancouver, and we're also near our grandchildren here.
Now, did you get any master's degrees, or did you just have an undergraduate degree?
I just have a BA from Reed College in Russian literature, but I did do a year in the middle of that. I went to study at University of Washington so that I could get some classes, more specialized classes that weren't offered at Reed. And some of those classes were graduate classes. And that experience confirmed for me that a bachelor's from Reed is pretty much as good as a master's from most other places.
I'm well familiar with Reed's reputation, and you're absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. So, now, did you, while you were there, in addition to doing Russian literature, did you take any writing classes? Where did you get the skills to become a writer?
Well, I wanted to be a writer since I decided when I was 11 that I wanted to be a writer. I'd always been a big reader. I taught myself to read when I was 4. I read a lot of the children's classics, and, when I was 11, I had an assignment in an English class to write a story based on a prompt, and I loved doing that, and it was well received, and I decided at that point that was what I wanted to do with my life. Of course, the decisions you make at 11 are not necessarily implemented in a smooth, uh, unbumpy fashion. So, during I wrote, just bits of things, in junior high and high school. In college, I had no time for anything except my schoolwork, but I was able to polish my writing skills in my schoolwork. I had to write lots and lots of papers, and I also did a translation for my bachelor's thesis. Um And then I wanted to, pursue literary translation, but because of life circumstances, I wasn't able to go to grad school right away, and in fact, ended up never going to grad school. And, I ended up working as an editor for pretty much my whole career, um, and writing little things here and there until I was in my mid-40s, and I decided it's time to get serious. My youngest child I had two pairs of children widely spaced, one from each marriage, and, when my youngest was in kindergarten, I thought, "Okay, this is the time. If I don't do it now, I'll never do it," and I started working on what eventually, through many iterations, evolved into my, bottom drawer novel, the one that will never see the world. But I kept going.
Russian literature. You get a degree in Russia, or a major or mastered, whatever, major in Russian literature. Do you have a favorite Russian writer?
I do. Dostoevsky is my favorite. Um, I'm very fond of Tolstoy as well, and they are somewhat opposite in many ways. Um, in terms of, Tolstoy is a realistic sort of writer, and Dostoevsky is a veers into the fantastic and certainly the weird, lots of the weird. But he has a connection to the spiritual side of things that is very valuable to me. So that's why he's my favorite. The Idiot is my favorite of his works.
Tolstoy gets a bad reputation from War and Peace, and yet I've read many a book that's longer than War and Peace with more characters. So I
Oh,
don't know
yeah.
why. I don't know why everybody's, War and Peace, and they act like it's the worst book in the world to read.
I think people have a hard time with Russian names, and you do have to understand the naming system to be able to navigate all of these dozens of characters in War and Peace, and I think that has a lot to do with what bogs people down, frankly.
I like it more than Anna Karenina. Didn't like that book for some reason. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only person. But now you move from there to writing what I call cozy mysteries. That seems like a long way away, isn't it? The Russian literature
It
to what
is.
you're writing now? Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't think you consider yourself a cozy mystery writer.
Well, not really. The term cozy mystery is kind of a big envelope term, that encompasses a lot of different things for different people. Um, my the mysteries that I fell in love with in my 20s were the writers of the British Golden Age, Dorothy Sayers, Niall Marsh, Patricia Wentworth, Josephine Tay, Marjorie Allingham. And some people consider them cozy, and they meet the sort of official cozy criteria, which are amateur sleuth, no profanity or graphic sex or violence. Basically, if you meet those criteria, you can be considered a cozy. And the amateur sleuth one is pretty flexible because people consider Poirot cozy, and he's not an amateur. But you look at the overall um, quality of those books and you compare it to what what's being written today that is kind of the core of the cozy genre, which is the mass market paperbacks with the punny titles and the animals on the cover or crafts or whatever. That's kind of the core cozy that can't be called anything else but cozy. They're really worlds apart. And I always wanted to be much closer to the British Golden Age writers than to the contemporary cozy cozies.
I think you're absolutely right. The- I can't take most of these cozy mysteries. I get them, I look at them, and it's like, well, here we are in Strawberry Lane and Blueberry Town. But what are you doing? Who writes this stuff? I,
Yeah,
are
it's
AI
it's
doing that?
they
I'm not sure.
I think most of them are written by actual humans, but they yeah, I feel like they sanitize life and murder, and I don't think murder should be sanitized. It's not there's nothing inherently cozy about murder. It's inherently not cozy. You can curl up by the fire with a cat in your lap and feel cozy while you're reading about it.
They're also smarter than the police all the time. They see everything the police don't see. Oh, yeah, if you're that smart, then join the police force. It bothers me.
Yeah, I don't care for that either, and that's why I partnered my amateur sleuth, Emily, with the sheriff, Luke.
Well, now you, I've read on your website that you are an Anglophile. You like
I
British
am.
things. Is that correct? What got you into the Anglophile? How'd that come develop?
Oh gosh, I can't remember a time when that wasn't the case, honestly. I grew up on the classics, many of which were written by Brits. Um, I've just always felt drawn to Britain. I was able to visit there in 2019, and it was all I could do to stop myself from kissing the soil when I got off the plane. It was just like, of course, I was in an airport. There wasn't actually any soil to kiss, but um, I guess because that's where most of my blood comes from. I have some Irish blood, but the greater portion of it is English, and there's just kind of a pull there. And to me, the cultural stuff that comes out of Britain tends to be of a higher quality than what we produce in America. They actually train their actors and care about authenticity and historical detail and that type of thing. And I'm so addicted now to British productions that I can hardly watch anything American anymore, although American ones are getting better, I will say that.
Do you have, in addition to your reading of the Golden Age classics, do you like Dickens? You read Dickens and all those other
Oh, yes.
Victorian era? Do you like those? Okay. I like Trollope.
Oh, I love Trollope. He's not as well known as he deserves to be, I think. I've read quite a few of his talk about long books, you know. I don't know the word
Exactly.
count of the longest Trollope. It's gotta be up there with War and Peace.
But you said you're reading Austen, I think you said? Do you like Jane Austen's?
Yeah, Jane Austen is my all-time favorite author, and I reread all her novels probably every year.
Are you like me? Do you get BritBox and Acorn TV? Do you watch those British channels?
Absolutely. That's most of what I watch. Everything from classic Doctor Who to, the latest mysteries, and
I guess I got hooked back on Masterpiece Theater days, way back and to this day, if you say to me, "Which one show would you like to watch?" I'd say Rumpole of the Bailey. I don't know
oh,
if you
I
ever watched
love
Rumpole.
Rumpole.
Never fear,
Oh, Rumpole.
Rumpole is here. He's so great.
I love
I
them
love
all.
Rumpel. And he had 2 different people playing his wife. What a wonderful, wonderful show. That was great.
He who must be obeyed.
That's right. She who must be obeyed. Absolutely. Wow. We could talk about this. Oh, the last thing I want to ask you, you even have a British publishing company, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yes. Um,
That's interesting.
that yeah, I didn't, um, pursue that on purpose because I wanted a British publisher. The first 2 books in my series, Arsenic with Austen and Bloodstains with Bronte, were published by Minotaur in the US. But then the editor who acquired my series, they had an internal shuffling, which goes on a lot in publishing houses, and she was no longer working for them, and nobody else was interested in keeping my series alive. So my agent found, Severn House, which is a they're kind of famous for taking on orphaned series from other publishers. That's a lot of what they do. And, they have their business model's kinda different from what's standard in America, which sometimes makes things a little tricky. But in terms of the relating to them on a personal level, they're terrific. My editor is great. She's, always listens to whatever I have to say about covers or whatever, and she does a really good job, so I'm happy there.
The series is called Crime with the Classics. Was that what you always intended to start out writing? Tying in classics with the crimes?
Yeah, I wrote several novels that were kind of hard to classify and proved to be, at that time, impossible to sell, and so I decided I needed to find something that would sell, and I'd loved reading mysteries, so I figured, "Why not write mysteries? They sell." So I very deliberately assembled a series concept, consisting of all the things that I personally love in a series. The small town setting full of quirky characters and I particularly wanted the amateur sleuth to have a profession related to books, and I went through a couple of other ideas before landing on her being a retired literature professor. But I wanted to bring the classics into it because, um, for as long as I've been writing seriously, I've been encountering people, other writers, who are not familiar with the classics, and to me, it was shocking, appalling. How can you become a writer without being nurtured on Austen and Dickens and all those great people? So I wanted to incorporate them into my work in some way in the hopes of getting even a few people to go and read the classics themselves.
The other thing is, were you influenced by the Sue Grafton books where the A is for this, B is for that? And because you start off arsenic and Austin, A, B, C, I think, and then would that influence you at all?
I was aware of Sue Grafton's books. I'd read a couple of them. I've always been fond of alliteration. I think it arose primarily because Austen was my favorite writer, so I started with her, and her name happens to begin with an A. And once I had that, I had an alliterative title with an A. I thought, oh, what the heck? Let's make it an alphabetical series. And then I won't be just scrounging around blind for another writer to write about.
You think you're going to be going through all the alphabet on this?
Probably not. I've already skipped 2 letters that I couldn't, find a writer that worked for me. I skipped E and G, um, and I'm skipping I, although I do plan to write a short story spoof called Iocane with Ionescu. But, I've finished the first draft of the J book, and
Okay.
I don't know how long the publisher's gonna wanna continue with the series. It's really in their court, and if Hanging with Hugo sells well, then there will be more.
Well, if you get to Z, you will be zooming with Zola. And considering you have a character who likes to talk French, this is a perfect book title. So if you hadn't thought of it, little credit to Blaine DeSantis, zooming with Zola. So I just want you to know that. Well, you know, there's so many questions I want to ask you, and we're already like 20 minutes into this interview. That's unbelievable. So let's before I ask, do you want to read a little bit about your book from your book to get us a bit of the feel for what we're going to getting in this book?
I always have a lot of humor in my books, even though it's not, you know, I don't take a light approach to murder itself, but I like to lighten the experience as a whole with a fair bit of humor sprinkled throughout. So I'm going to start with the introduction of the Hughes family. The father of the family has come to Stony Beach to do repairs on a stained glass window, and he's brought his family with him. And there's no place else for them to stay, so of course they have to stay at Emily's house, Windy Corner. The Hughes family arrived just before dinner on Wednesday evening. Katie was busy setting the table, so Emily went to the door to greet them. On the porch stood a tall, brown haired young man, handsome in a rough and tousled way, with shaggy hair and a few days' growth of beard, holding a couple of large tote bags. Next to him was a brunette who might have posed for one of the pre Raphaelite painters, incongruously clad in a t shirt and jeans, and holding a child on her hip who looked to be about 2. The child sported a shoulder length mop of blonde curls and not a single stitch of clothing, not even a diaper. When it squirmed in its mother's arms, Emily saw that it was a boy. She blinked away her astonishment and put on a welcoming smile. You must be the Hughes family. Welcome to Windy Corner. I'm Emily Richards. She started to put out a hand, then realized neither of the adults had one free to shake. The young man nodded. Adrian, this is Polly, he indicated his wife with a tilt of the head, and our little guy, Raphael. Ah, so the pre Raphaelite connection was not lost on this artistic couple. Pleased to meet you. Please come in. Emily stood back for them to enter. Did Raphael have an accident on the way? Polly cocked her head with a questioning look, then laughed. Oh, you mean his bare bum? No, he hates clothes, rips them off as soon as we put them on him, so we let him be naked most of the time. You don't mind, do you? Emily swallowed. Well, is he potty trained? Polly shrugged. Mostly. I'm afraid I'm going to have to insist on at least a diaper if there's a chance of accidents. We have some valuable rugs and furniture. Then she thought of Lizzie. And my housekeeper has a little girl. I'm not sure Katie's ready to explain to her why little boys are different. Adrian and Polly exchanged a look of consternation. We have a few diapers for nighttime, Adrian said, but we can't guarantee he won't pull them off as soon as we put them on. If you'd make the effort, I would appreciate it. It's only for a couple of days. Your cottage will be ready Friday afternoon. Emily wasn't thrilled with the idea of a tiny time bomb running around one of her cottages either, but at least the floors there would be easier to clean. Polly heaved a sigh. All right, Betty, let's get you presentable for polite society. She put a slight scornful emphasis on the last words. Where do we go? Emily led the way to the back of the house, to the Dickens room. You'll be in here. The bathroom is right next door. I believe dinner's almost ready. I'll see if Katie has a high chair Raphael can use. No need, Adrian said cheerfully, setting the tote bags on the bed. He can sit on my lap. He eats off our plates anyway. Emily had a vision of Raphael as the young, untamed Helen Keller from The Miracle Worker, running around the table and grabbing food at will off everyone's plates. At least this child was too short to reach that far.
I like that. That's a funny part about this little 2-year-old boy who doesn't wear clothing and wreaks havoc. I enjoyed that a lot. That was cute. Well, very good. But what I want to say is, and as I say, holy moly, your book starts page 1, bingo, bango, bongo. I mean, you get every character in there from the beginning. It's amazing. Do you do that in all your books? Get everything out there, get your basic characters in?
Not always. This one evolved it a little differently in that I had the main story built around the murder and the characters that were essential to that. And I started writing it and I realized that I didn't have enough going on to make a 70,000 word book. So then I brought in Emily's brother Oscar and his fiancee Lauren and all the drama around their wedding, which they're planning to have at Windy Corner in a month. And and then after that, I decided to have the whole situation with the broken window in the church and the Hughes family and all that. So I kept adding things in. I just ended up with kind of a crowded beginning because of that process, I think.
But I got everybody there, and we know we got the wedding. We know we've got the bride's parents are coming. We have Emily is just getting back from her honeymoon. It's bingo, bango, bongo. There's a lot going on here, and I thought I really enjoyed that. Now, one of the characters is Marguerite. Now, Marguerite always, not always, but 90% of the time seems to be is ending all her words or sentences with French words. Is she French herself?
Yes, Marguerite is a professor of French language and literature at Reed, and Emily's best friend. And she is French by birth, and she wants to make sure nobody ever forgets that. So she sprinkles her conversation with French not because she needs to, but because she's keeping up that image.
I know enough, little bit about French so I can figure out what's going on, what she's saying. I'm reading a book now where the person is ending their words in Turkish. I know absolutely no Turkish, and I'm
Oh my goodness.
floundering at that. Yeah, I'm floundering a bit on that, So yeah, that author will be on in a few. Gotta for what you did that. That's a killer. Ay. Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Now you had some supporting characters that come in here, and that is a gentleman and a young girl. They're supporting, but they're main characters too. You've got the hulking gentleman who's got this very young girl, 12-year-old girl with him. Tell us a little bit about them, if you could.
Well, the girl is actually older. She looks 12, but she's actually 15. But their history is the girl and her mother were living with an abusive man, and when the mother realized that her daughter was being abused, she got them out of that situation, and they went to a shelter. And the shelter was run by Moses, who's the big guy, meant to echo Jean Valjean. Um, and he took them in, and then the mother died of cancer, and she asked Moses to take care of her daughter before she died. So he is trying to adopt her, but the guy that they were living with before wants to wants to get Charlotte back, um, and so he has hired a social worker to find some way to prove that Moses is not fit to be her guardian.
Right. And of course, we had the situation that Moses is a black gentleman, and this girl is almost an albino. It sounds like everything's white on her white hair, everything else.
Yeah.
That also, I can see them going wild over something like that. But yeah, this gentleman, I think his name is Terry Garner. Is that the gentleman's name? Is that correct? I'm not sure.
Oh, the
He was
the
the
abusive guy is Terry.
yeah,
Carrie.
right, Terry.
Yeah.
Right. He wants to get this girl back, not because he's related to her. That's the thing. He's not related to her, but he has abused this child to the point where she won't talk anymore. Now, is this something you researched? Does this happen? Is this realistic type situation?
Yeah, this is a thing that can happen. In cases of extreme trauma, one of the possible responses, if a child feels that, for instance, abusers will typically threaten their victims, don't ever tell anybody or horrible things will happen. And so they feel like they have no voice in the situation, and or that if they use their voice, it wouldn't be heard. And that can actually translate into physically losing their voice.
And I don't mean this that for these characters particular, but are any of your characters in these books autobiographical or people you know? I mean, are you Emily, or is Emily you, or are you drawing upon other people in your life?
Emily and I have a lot in common. We're not identical, but we share a lot of things. She is somewhat more outgoing than I am. She's more of a Luddite than I am. But by this book, she's gotten over her aversion to technology. But in the beginning, she didn't even own a computer. And I verified with a current Reed professor that you can actually get away with being Reed professor and not using a computer.
There you go. Didn't know that.
So that's her. That's not me. I'm oh, shiny new thing. Um, Luke has some things in common with someone I knew many, many, many years ago. And Emily's great aunt, who is not a living character in the series, but is kind of she's the one that Emily inherited her wealth from, and Emily, thinks about her often, and She is kind of modeled on a cross between my grandmother and my great aunt Gladys. They were both very strong women, and my aunt Gladys in particular was she was the one who fostered my love of books and corrected my grammar. And uh, my father was an editor, but it was basically because of Aunt Gladys that I became an editor, I think. So, yeah. Other than that, the characters really just come out of the air, you know.
So, one of the things you mentioned a few months ago was getting to the 70,000 word mark. Was that the hardest thing in writing this book, or what did you find the most difficult part in writing Hanging with Hugo?
Well, once I got all the different plot threads in place, the length wasn't an issue anymore. Um, I think the hardest thing for me, I don't want to give too much away, but the book does end with kind of a protracted chase, which is the kind of thing that I don't write very often. And so that was challenging for me. I usually, the murder is re- murderer is revealed in a more of a stable situation, but in this case, people were driving all over the county and trying to round people up, and
That brings me to a question about a map.
a map.
A map.
Yeah.
You are having people doing things, going here, hither, and yon. This shop. Do you have a map? Do you have an internal map, an external map, or do you just what's? Tell us a little bit about this city. What's it called? Shady. What's it called?
Stony Beach.
Stony. Yep. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's more of a village, actually. Um, I modeled it after Rockaway Beach, where we have our retreats every summer. But I wanted it to be fictional so that I wouldn't be tied to the realities of Rockaway Beach. For instance, Rockaway Beach has its own police department, and I didn't want an independent police department. I wanted a sheriff's representative. Um, Rockaway Beach has a very long beach, as the beach implies. I think it's 7 miles, but no harbor. And I needed a harbor for a couple of the books. So I added a harbor. And, the businesses are different and whatnot. But the basic orientation of the town is the same, and which is it's a long, narrow strip sandwiched between the ocean and a lake and some and mountains on the other side, on the east side. So um, I kept that basic orientation of the town. And then I placed Windy Corner, Emily's home, about a mile beyond where the town kind of peters out.
That I couldn't quite figure out where that was in relationship to the whole town, but I knew it was on the outskirts. Didn't know how far. Okay, that's interesting. So you don't have your own map at home where
I think I created one when I was writing the first book, but I haven't really referred to it in a long time.
what you would just I
All in
guess
my
once
head.
you start it, you don't need to have it. You got it all in your mind. You don't need to have a physical map.
Yeah,
But I'm
yeah.
just a nut about maps. I love to see them in books, then I see them and I don't use them. But that's one of those things. Well, then it's hard to get maps in Kindle books because I got to go back to where the map is and where I'm at now, back and forth, and that doesn't work. Then I lose my spot. Very difficult. Very difficult. Wow. Well, now we're dealing with Hanging with Hugo. So, what came first? The title, the plot? How do you do these things? You have 6 or 7 books in this. Do you begin with a title or do you begin with an inspiration?
I begin with the classic author that I'm theming the book around, and I find a word that has something to do with death that starts with the same letter, because that's the pattern that I set. Um, and if there's a choice, then I decide, what kind of story is going to match, which word is going to match the story I want to write best. And then I think about if this author were actually writing this story, if he were actually writing a murder mystery, what sort of crime would it be? What sort of perpetrator would it be? What sort of victim would it be? And I just start building from there. With Hugo, I felt like it was one of the easier he was one of the easier authors to build off of, because in Les Miserables, you have this fantastic story of I mean, it's not a murder mystery, but you have criminals and people working on the side of justice, and you have these characters who are larger than life and are drawn so beautifully, and the eternal themes of justice versus mercy and forgiveness and redemption, and there's just so much to work with there, and I felt like I hardly had to do anything to construct the main plot.
Did you have any characters that you enjoyed more than others when writing this book?
Well, the Hughes family is fun to write just because they're not the people I'd most want to have for friends, but they were fun to write. Um, I enjoyed writing Charlotte because there was the challenge of Emily learning to communicate with her and form a relationship with her even though she didn't speak. So I had to find ways for her to express herself without words. So I made her an excellent, artist, which helps a lot. She can draw pictures of things that she wants to communicate.
I thought that was very well done. I really enjoyed the fact that she could communicate at times through her pictures that she would draw, and I really liked it. I also like the fact that knit one, pearl two. She taught the girl how to knit.
Yeah, that was fun too.
My mother taught me to knit when I was a kid, and so I always appreciate books with knitting and people who can knit and crochet and all those things. Does Emily do that? Is that one of her characteristics?
Yeah, yeah, you see her knitting something or other in every book, and that's another thing we have in common because I'm always knitting.
Well, I'll tell you, I like these characters. I really do. I like the in effect almost like a double wedding. I mean, you have Oscar. Now, Oscar is Emily's half brother, and he's marrying. I can't remember the young lady's name.
Lauren,
Lauren. Okay, she's Chinese or Japanese,
Chinese.
and Lauren's parents are there. And they want to do things a certain way, and Lauren and Oscar want to do things another way. So we have all these little, we have to hide what we're doing from this person, and this person's going out to buy this person and thing. And so we have both an American and a Chinese type. I thought that was well done. I really like that. Did you did you intend to do that from the beginning, or did that just grow as you were writing?
It kinda grew. I have attended a traditional Chinese wedding reception, and so I used I it they're wonderfully colorful and dramatic, and so I had lots of material there that I could weave into the story, so I think I probably had that at least in the back of my mind from the beginning.
I like the colors, like you said. I have a cousin who cousin's daughter. I don't know what that is. Second cousin. I'm not sure. She married an Indian gentleman, and talk about a very colorful wedding. Oh, extremely colorful there. So yeah, but I thought that made the whole thing. They had a wedding. They had the Indian wedding at one time, then they break. Now we have the American wedding another time. Oh, so yeah, very well done though. I like this a lot. And now was Hanging with Hugo your original working title?
Yes.
Oh, you're lucky then. You're lucky.
Yeah, my publisher has never quarreled with any of my titles, and we're
Wow,
lucky.
so you've basically you self-titled all these books.
Mhm.
Now, what about the covers? Do you give them ideas?
I they don't ask well, let's see. The first book that I did with them, they asked me for ideas up front, and then, but with all the books, they send me a draft and I say, "Well, I like this. I don't really like that. Can we try this?" And they've been very good about listening to my suggestions and incorporating them and working till we have something that we're all happy with. So,
A cover is so important.
this cover really captured kind of the darker mood of the book, I thought, pretty well.
I think a cover can certainly it's something that hits your eyes and makes people want to look at it, maybe buy it. You hope so,
Hope
and
so.
yeah, no, I think cover art's very important, and so that's I like the fact that you have that now. Um, Again, you talked to us earlier that you've written a book with Jay. Is that correct? Is that what's coming up next? A Jay book?
Yeah.
We're going from
Well, actually, I don't actually have a contract for that one yet. I think they wanna see how Hanging with Hugo does before they write the contract. But I do have another book, an unrelated book coming out in between. It's a standalone mystery called Gina Washington Slept Here, and it's part mystery, part, self-discovery, part romance, and, it's a book that I really had a lot of fun writing, and I hope people will have as much fun reading it.
Wow, is that gonna take place out there in the West Coast, or is it gonna be, an other setting?
It's in the West Coast, mostly in the Santa Cruz area where I used to live, but it also ventures up into the Northwest as well, into Oregon. Um, the premise is that a young woman whose mother disappeared when she was 12, is trying to find out what happened to her mother, and she finds clues along the
Find
way.
clues, alright, that's good. And now let's just say the people, our dear friends over at Severn House, who I get a lot of books from also, do a good job. Let's say, Katherine Bolger Hyde, we want to have you for another 4 books. Have you already thought about JKLMN? Have you given thought to those additional titles that might be coming?
I have not planned anything that far ahead. The J book is Justice with James, Henry James, and probably looking at Kipling for K. And for M, I want to do one of my dear favorite dead English women, as I call them, Nio Marsh. Um, but I haven't settled on there. There are a lot of letters I haven't settled on.
So Herman Melville's not there. He's not the first to your mind to come to your mind.
No, no. I mean, Millville's great, but I don't know how many people actually read him these days. And if people aren't familiar with the classic author, then the book you lose a lot in terms of the illusions that you're trying to make and whatnot.
As an author, now you said you use technology, and that you
Yes.
got to. Okay, do you understand how Dickens or Trollope or Jane Austen could write handwriting all these books and pages? And I just
I envision terrible writer's cramp. But, I mean, I know something about their processes. For instance, Trollope, worked for the British Postal Service. He invented the red cylindrical post boxes that are used to this day, which I think is a really cool little fact. But he used to get up at 5 in the morning and write for 4 hours before he went to his office. And my understanding, I may be getting this wrong, is that he didn't even do a lot of revision, that he was able to just write steadily and produce steadily. And he wrote like 70 novels, and
yeah, I
most of them
know.
are long.
They are. Yep.
So he's kind of an amazing model of productivity.
I'm amazed at these people who could just write. I know Zola wrote 21 or 22 books of a certain series, and I can't imagine the paper, the if he's scratching out and corrections and everything else. It's just something else. It's,
Dickens, I think, was a huge corrector. I've seen like pages of his manuscripts that you could hardly read because they're written over several directions, and it's this just incredible mess.
but it also helped them, don't you think, that they had their own, if not they didn't own it, but they were contributors to weekly or biweekly magazines. That
Absolutely.
really that made them focus, that made them get the stuff done, and then eventually they would come out after it was all over. They put the whole book together, but it was really something. It's changed so much. Writing has changed so much.
Yeah,
Yeah, wow,
yeah.
that's really something. Well, I really. Oh yeah, do I gather that a lot of the characters seem to be pretty religious in your books? Is that am I getting that correctly?
Well, Emily is,
Emily, okay.
and occasionally other characters as well, but mostly Emily. And that's something that she and I have in common. We're both converts to the Eastern Orthodox faith, and I try not to go overboard in talking about it because, of course, some people just don't want any kind of faith element in their books, and I've gotten nasty emails from people complaining about how I was trying to shove Christianity down their throats, which I'm not trying to do at all. But
Oh my,
Orthodoxy is kind of exotic, to Americans because the way we celebrate things, the fact that our Easter is anywhere from a week to 5 weeks later usually than Western Easter, and
especially this year. This year it's like a
yeah,
5-week gap.
yeah, it's 5 weeks, it's crazy. So I throw in little details that I hope are colorful and will pique people's interest without having them feel like I'm trying to convert.
My wife is Romanian, and so we spent some time, well, one month a year in particular. We spent on 100 straight days there. I joke with people that I become an honorary member of the Romanian Orthodox Church. But I do have stuff that they gave me. It's like, here, we want you to have this. If you're one of us now, okay. I didn't, but they're a little bit different. It is a little bit more exotic, and yeah, and we're not quite sure in Romania who they listen to. Do they listen to the Romanian Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox? I don't know. But you know what? It's okay. It's okay. I don't mind. It didn't offend me at all. It's like down here in this. I now live in South Carolina. Somebody does something. Well, God bless their soul. That happens all the time. I mean, yeah, it's there. It's there. So, hey, it's one of those things, so it's fine with me. I don't care. By my word, I have had a wonderful time chatting with you. I really do. Are you thinking of ever doing writing anything into with Russia involved, or are you going to just stay on this end? Because you,
Well, I had an idea for a historical novel that would have um, been set partly in like ninth century Russia, but I don't know that that's ever really going to come to pass. I did spend 2 weeks in Russia in 2019, just before the pandemic, but I wasn't. It was a like a pilgrimage trip with members of my church. We were going to various churches and monasteries, sometimes 4 in a day. It was not the kind of thing where I could immerse myself deeply in any one place or event or anything to the way I would want to do if I were researching a novel. I just came back with this blur of, gold leaf and 9-story iconostases, and I was just it's crazy. It's beautiful, but it's crazy. Um, and the way the political situation is now, I doubt that I'll ever have a chance to go back.
were you in
So,
Moscow? Is that where you were at?
yeah, we started in Moscow, and then we went to Pskov and St. Petersburg, and then Volam Monastery, which is in, Lake Ladoga on the border of Finland.
I was in one town in Russia. I was on a cruise going from Alaska to China, and the one stop was in Vladivostok.
Oh.
That's yeah. We were the only cruise liner that had been there like 10 years. There we were. Okay. And for one of the things, I'll never forget this. They took us to their science museum, and we got to the science museum, and all the front steps were crumbled. It was a new museum. What happened? Oh, we got the cement from China. Okay, that tells us all. Tells me a lot about it. But there's some beautiful, beautiful artwork over there. That I can, I can easily see it being a neat setting for certain books, or people want to do a series set in Russia at the time to do all that. It'd be a lot of fun. So anyway, well, listen, Catherine, I have taken up too much of your valuable time. I thank you for coming on Books and Looks and chatting with us today.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed being here.
Well, folks, hope you enjoyed this. Like I said, I hope she gets 20, 25 books in and she takes up my idea for Zooming with Zola. I tell you what, I had a very good time discussing things with her. She's a lovely lady, so I appreciate her coming in and taking time about this. Fun stuff when you talk to these authors. What am I looking at? Well, if you remember last week, I said I'm looking at the spring season. Yeah. Well, today I'm looking at spring. Yeah, I'm looking at spring. You say to me, Blaine, what do you mean spring? As I'm recording this interview, I got hummingbirds outside. Yep, the hummingbirds are back. My hummingbirds are back here. I love my little guys, and they showed up 2, 3 days ago. We have fig trees. We got little pieces of, the fig fruit's starting to come here. Yeah, my wife's peony plants, they're coming and blooming. I'm telling you, spring is all around. Do you have it? Yeah, we have the pollen too. Yeah, we have all that. We have all those things that are spring, but spring is here. It is upon us. It is time for joy and happiness. Oh, we made it through another winter, made it through another winter. So anyway, that's just what I'm looking at. Something lighthearted. Spring is here. Anyway, on behalf of viewsonbooks.com, where you can get my reviews on this and other books, and on behalf of my good friends at Podcast Studio X, this is Blaine DeSantis for Books and Looks, saying may all your leaves be pages in a book.